Today, Syria agreed to a tentative plan to hand over all its chemical weapons to Russia. Vladimir Putin said, and those weapons better not be gay.
The New York Times today published an unusual op-ed piece. It was unusual because it was written by Russian President Vladimir Putin. I like that he thinks we read the New York Times op-ed section. Unless he had it published in the crossword puzzle section, 99% of us will never even see it.
The phrase Russian peace proposal is not a familiar one. I mean, if you run a search on it, Google assumes you misspelled it.
Not a lot of love for Vladimir Putin from the late night comics. Let's bring our roundtable to talk about all this. We have from ABC, Matthew Dowd and Cokie Roberts, the editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal, Paul Gigot, and from the Congress, Republican Justin Amash and Democrat Donna Edwards. Welcome to all of you. And Matthew, let me begin with you. You saw the president right out of the box there say we are in a better position now than we were 2 weeks ago. Is he right?
Well, yeah, because there's an agreement between Russia and the United States and hopefully Syria. I'm assuming Russia's been talking to Syria since this is about their country.
No, not yet.
I mean, I'm assuming there's been conversations going on. The last 2 weeks, I think, has been one of the most fascinating periods, I think, that I've seen in a long time. Because, first of all, we were going to go to war, and then we weren't going to go to war. Then we were going to go to Congress for permission. Then we weren't going to go to Congress for permission. Then the president was going to give a talk, and then his talk got usurped by the discussions going on, the proposals going on. And then he's about to, have all these interviews, and then now there's a proposal to get rid of chemical weapons. And all the allies are all topsy-turvy. Some Republicans support him not go. Some Republicans support him going to Congress asking permission. Some are against.
But you heard the president. He says that all doesn't matter. We ended up in the right place.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying in the end, I think he. It's to me, it's he using a football analogy. Here's a guy that fumbled to the goal line. Here's a guy that fumbled to the goal line and scored on the goal line. And many people are criticizing because he wasn't more efficient and more disciplined about a rush on the field.
A lot of people feel that way about the Cuban Missile Crisis in retrospect and going.
Well, we didn't know as much about it.
Exactly.
In real time.
I mean, that Kennedy essentially stumbled towards success, and I think that the big difference here is that we've known every step of the way. Not only do we know every thought that's going on, people are not. It's all in real time, so that it looks so just disheveled.
But Congressman, on the substance, some of your Republican colleagues, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, harshly criticizing the agreement. They say they see it as an act of provocative weakness on America's part. We cannot imagine a worse signal to send to Iran as it continues its push for a nuclear weapon. You agree?
I don't agree. And increasingly, their views are the fringe views within the Republican Party. The Republican Party believes we shouldn't have gone to war. I think most Republicans believe we're in the right spot now in the sense that at least there's a process where we can get the chemical weapons out of there. And we haven't achieved success yet, but at least we're avoiding the bombing, and people back home do not want us to get involved in a war over there.
And Congresswoman, I think this is one of the places where the majority of Democrats in the House agree with the majority of Republicans.
That's true, but not all. I mean, I think one of the questions I have coming from the left is that we were highly critical of George Bush because we didn't think he negotiated enough. And so now there's a big criticism of the president because he negotiated like a lot right up until the 11th hour. And I think we have to take some stock of that. I mean, what really is clear to me is that the reason that the Russians are at the table is because of the threat of force. And I think it's unavoidable to come to that not to come to that conclusion.
Got to be the dissenter at this table, George. I don't think that we are better off than we were 2 weeks ago. I think the president has made himself hostage to Vladimir Putin and to Bashar Assad. We're asked to believe now that the man who denied he had chemical weapons until last week, the man that John Kerry called a thug and a murderer, has fallen off his tank on the road to the Damascus suburbs and is going to is suddenly a changed man. He's going to come clean. And Vladimir Putin, the man who has protected him for 2 years, is going to turn around and say, yeah, sure, everything's on the table.
So how do you see this playing out? He's supposed to come up with Assad, if he endorses this agreement, supposed to come up with a full catalog of his chemical weapons in a week.
There are 1,000 ways to cheat on this. He could lie about the declaration. Then once he makes the declaration, and by the way, already Russia and the United States don't agree on the weapons that Syria has. So we're going to fight about that for a while. Then we're going to fight over the UN resolution. I think that you can hide the weapons. And all the while, Assad is buying time so that he can escalate
And
against the opposition.
And the sanction in the proposal is to go back to the United Nations, to the Security Council, where, of course, Russia can veto it. Now,
Although the president says he reserves the right to use force.
One thing that's not going to change is the force posture that is there currently isn't going to change, and the president has not said, you know what, now all hands are off. He said, there's still a possibility of a threat of force if over this period of time until mid-2014 the weapons aren't identified, that they aren't removed, that they aren't destroyed. So
but unlikely
I think
the Congress
it's real.
backs him up on that. I want to put the question to you, Congressman Amash, that I put to the president. What if, this, despite all the difficulties on trying to find these weapons and get the inspectors going, let's say it goes on for a year, Assad keeps the process going, but it strengthens his hold on power. What does that mean? Is that a victory for him, a defeat for the United States?
Well, I wouldn't call it a defeat for the United States. It may be a victory for him. But at the end of the day, we can't be involved in every civil war around the world. And I think the American people feel very strongly about that. I was back home and did 11 town halls in 2 days. I can't tell you how strong the response was in opposition to the war. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like it.
Because you were wearing a Darth Vader T-shirt.
And so I think, Assad may achieve a victory, but it doesn't mean that the United States has lost. We don't want to get our hands.
And foreign policy right now is foreign policy decisions, and actually all domestic policy decisions are being affected by two huge dynamics that are going around in this country. First, we spent $1 trillion on a war and lost thousands of lives that ended up us being no better off in the aftermath of those 10 years. The country or the world not being better off. And two, as of today, and it's been this way for the last few years, the trust in the government's ability to do anything right, foreign policy, domestic policy, whatever, is at an all-time low. So when you put that in a president's hands, he is really handcuffed in his ability to exercise any foreign policy, which is why I think his agreement with Russia was the best case scenario for this president.
And I must say, if Assad looks at history, now this takes a while, but if he looks at the last places that we did this kind of thing, in Libya and Iraq, Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein are dead.
Eventually.
And
yeah.
eventually.
But that would lead him to not give up the weapons.
Right. And the chances that the president is going to go back to Congress and ask for war sanction is vanishingly small. I just don't see it. And the problem here is not just that we're washing our hands of Syria and that Assad might win. It's that his patron, Iran, would win. And then you look at the prospect of Iran with nuclear weapons, and they're going to see this.
You heard the president there. He has reached out personally to the Iranian president, feels there's some opening there.
I think the danger here is that they look at this. The president's now in the diplomatic maze, and the Iranians look at this and say, you know what, we can get into that same kind of diplomatic morass and get some kind of haze and deal. And they, meanwhile, go on to keep marching nuclear weapons. And what does Israel do? Israel now has to make a calculation. Can we trust President Obama's assurances to protect us? And if they can't, they might strike.
The history of the world, of the civilized world, that shows no real good example when somebody came in and imposed an external rationale on a foreign country. So we're going to impose democracy on you, and therefore it's going to succeed. Every single time it's
lived a lot of that in the Bush White House.
Every single time it's succeeded in the history of the world, it is because the country itself decided it was the right thing to do.
Nobody's talking about imposing democracy.
Well, you're talking about taking out Assad.
We're talking about empowering the rebels to be able to give them a chance.
So one at a time, Donna.
The last thing that the president wanted, and I think that any of us needed, is to take down Assad in a state of chaos, because there's so many different actors on the ground there. We need somebody to actually have control over those chemical weapons now until they're removed and destroyed. And so I think that you heard the president saying that was not their goal as regime change. But I mean, the use of chemical weapons was a game changer. The fact that the Russians finally came to the table, I think, makes a huge difference for the president and our ability to move forward on this. And you know what? I think Iran must look at this and say, you know what? Maybe those Americans really are serious. Maybe they really would use force against us. I read that completely differently.
Find it in the next couple of weeks. I do want to switch to domestic policy, the rest of the president's interview. And Congressman Amash, let me bring this to you. The president talking about these looming showdowns over the potential government shutdown this week. We hit the debt limit on October 18th, I believe. And you saw the president. I pushed back a few times. He certainly seems to be saying he is not going to negotiate at all over the debt limit, despite the precedents. And he's banking, I believe, on Republicans in the House either falling apart or caving.
Well, we have to have compromise. The president himself is arguing that we're not willing to compromise. We're willing to compromise. And part of that compromise means when you want to borrow more money, we're going to have some cuts in government. And that's all Republicans are asking for. And we're not talking about draconian cuts. We're talking
you have a strong faction asking for defunding Obamacare, though.
We're talking about delaying Obamacare for a year, and which is something the president has asked for with their employer mandate. So let's delay it for everyone. I think we're doing the president a favor if we delay it. The program is not ready to be implemented. If anything, the president should be asking us to delay it because it's better for him politically.
Does he see it as a favor? I
don't think so at all. I mean, the fact is, we've voted now 41 times to defund Obamacare. I mean, maybe 42 is a charm. I mean, I think the president is right that, we can't negotiate it over the debt ceiling, and we can't be irresponsible in shutting down the government. The fact is, Speaker Boehner has to decide what kind of speaker he wants to be. He can be a speaker who governs and achieves success by getting Democratic votes to continue government operations and to raise the debt limit.
But you're saying that he's got to turn his back on the majority of his conference
he
and
has
say,
to turn his
work.
back on 50 members of the Republican
Party.
No, not at all. I mean, look, when you go back home and talk to Republicans at home on the grassroots level, they want us to delay Obamacare. They want us to defund Obamacare. They want us to stop Obamacare.
No.
This is the majority.
Republicans at home on the grassroots level want Obama to be gone.
This is the majority
it's a visceral reaction against Obama.
I don't think so.
That anything his name is attached to.
Talk to Republicans and Democrats at home about Obamacare. It doesn't work. Premiums are going up. Access to health care is going to go down. We need to do something to delay it.
What's happening on this issue, the budget issue, is an outcome of President Obama's biggest failure, which is he came to Washington and it was polarized and it was divided, and he's now going to leave office, or he's now in these last 3 years of his office more polarized and more divided. Part of which is from him, part of which is from Republicans. He said he was going to fix it. He didn't.
So, Paul, how does this showdown end? It does appear that the speaker is in a quandary, which is why he was reaching out, begging Democrats to come to the table this week. It doesn't seem he can get a majority together for anything right now.
It's too bad, because I think Republicans have forgotten the most important number for them. It's 218. That's the majority in the House. And without 218 agreeing on something, they have no leverage.
And it's not there now.
And it's not there right now. And they need to get their act together, because if they don't do that, then the Senate and the President are going to have the whip hand and be able to drive policy on them. And then in the end, they'll end up surrendering. So they need to get organized.
Do you see a prospect of that? Is there anything right now on these big issues that can get 218 votes in the House?
I think we're working toward it. We've got a deal that some of my colleagues have looked at. Tom Graves is working on a proposal to fund the government outside of Obamacare, so everything except Obamacare. Send it to the Senate, send the Republican version to the Senate, let them negotiate on it, and we'll try to come up with a compromise. But you can't start where the Democrats want us to start. You have to start with a Republican proposal. We have a Republican majority that was elected by Republicans. Let's start with a Republican proposal.
Matthew, I want to bring another question I brought to the president to you. This whole notion that basically 2013 has come a cropper for the president. Everything he's put at the top of the agenda is stalled or failing or universal. You saw he kind of deflected it. But if you were in the White House right now, what would you tell him is the best path to salvaging this year?
Well, what's interesting is I was around a White House where at the same point in time in the presidency, in the aftermath of Katrina, where the President Bush's job approval dropped to about 43 or 44, exactly
where we're getting right there right now.
It's exactly where he is today. And basically you have Congress that is in a dysfunctional place, which is where it was when he was president. And that point in time, it was basically the beginning of the end of President Bush's presidency. I think the president, he's a very big fan of history, understands that. He watched that go on with the president. I think that unless the president changes the trajectory, he is on the road to irrelevancy. And that's why your last question, which went to 2016 president, which is what everybody now wants to talk about, even though there's all these huge issues, understand that this president is fast becoming irrelevant in Washington.
I think his gamble will be, I'm sorry, Coach, just brief. I think his gamble is to take back the House in 2014, which is why I think he may want a shutdown. Because he wants a shutdown because that's the way he can blame it on the Republicans, blame any economic fallout on the House Republicans, and say, you've got to give me the majority for the next
shutdown,
2 years.
But not default. He can't
No,
afford
he can't go to default. But
shutdown.
shut down the government works for the president.
I would have a hard time believing that the president would want that. I would say he's probably not opposed to it, but I would have a hard time saying he wants it.
Okay. he hopes the Republicans are silly enough to do it.
That's right.
That's where it is.
And that's why he's going to hold on to this firm negotiating position right now. You know, we got to take a break right now. But thank you all very much. But before we do, I want to get the latest on those devastating floods in Colorado. They've already taken 4 lives. Hundreds may still be trapped. And ABC's Ginger Z is on the ground in Fort Morgan today. Ginger, this has been such a punishing storm. Officials now are engaged in the largest air rescue since Hurricane Katrina. We were just talking about it. And I see that river right there is about to breach.
Yeah, this is not even the river. This already breached, George. This is actually the runoff. The river is actually a 1/4 mile back. This is the South Platte River, and it's the one they're most concerned about today because it's not done rising. And we've seen it now feet above its record or historic levels. And let me show you, because you've got all the runoff, chunks of the road falling apart as we've been here. You can see all of the floodwaters gnawing away at parts of Colorado. So the rescues really are the part that's so dramatic. Yesterday, we got to see some of them. We also got to meet people who are evacuating their homes. I want to show you the pictures, though, of all of those dramatic rescues. Some of the students that got caught up in the mountains airlifted out. You've got the rescues of the horses, because it's not just the people that are stuck. This is a lot of farmland out here, farms that are now completely ruined. They're everything that they had, and we're hearing a lot of that here in Morgan County. So this has been, watching the rivers rise and go into people's homes is painful.
And the president
that's where we're at with flood watches and warnings around.
That's right. The president declared a disaster zone overnight, yet there's more rain coming.
Right. We get another 1 to 3 inches widespread today. That's something we haven't seen for the last 36 hours. More rain, not only today into early tomorrow, finally drying out by Tuesday.
Okay, Ginger Z.